In ancient lands where hills rolled like slumbering giants, a scene of dread unfolded in the valley of Elah. On one side stood the trembling ranks of the Israelite army, their faces pale masks of fear, their shields heavy with doubt. On the opposing ridge, the Philistine forces gathered, a dark tide of confident warriors. From their midst, a figure of immense stature emerged, his shadow stretching long across the valley floor. It was Goliath of Gath, a champion whose height was said to be over 9 feet, clad from head to toe in gleaming bronze armor. His voice, a booming thunder that echoed off the hills, carried a challenge dripping with contempt. He mocked the Israelites and their God, daring any man among them to face him in single combat, to decide the fate of both nations with one decisive duel. Day after day, his taunts rained down upon the Israelites, and day after day their courage withered, leaving them paralyzed by terror. Into this theater of fear walked a young shepherd named David, his face still fresh with the innocence of the fields. He had come not to fight, but to bring food and news to his older brothers serving in the army of King Saul. As he arrived at the camp's edge, the familiar, booming voice of Goliath reached his ears. He saw the challenge, but more than that, he saw the profound fear that had gripped the hearts of his countrymen. While seasoned soldiers cowered, a righteous indignation stirred within the young shepherd. He could not comprehend how the army of the living God could be so disgraced by an uncircumcised Philistine. Unfazed by the giant's might, David sought an audience with King Saul. He spoke not with the arrogance of a warrior, but with the unshakable faith of a shepherd who had protected his flock from lions and bears. He declared his trust not in his own strength, but in the God who had delivered him before and would surely deliver him again. King Saul, desperate yet skeptical, reluctantly agreed, offering David his own royal armor. But the heavy bronze helmet and cumbersome coat of mail were unfamiliar and ill-fitting for the shepherd boy. David respectfully declined them. He would not rely on the tools of man, but on the faith that had been his constant companion. He walked out onto the valley floor, his shepherd's staff in one hand and his simple sling in the other. He paused only to select 5 smooth stones from a nearby brook, each one a small testament to his trust in a greater power. As he approached, Goliath let out a roar of derisive laughter. Was this the champion Israel had sent, a mere boy armed with a stick and a sling? The giant cursed David by his gods, promising to feed his flesh to the birds of the air. But David's reply rang with a clarity that cut through the giant's bluster. "You come against me with sword and spear," he called out, "but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty." With a fluid, practiced motion, David placed a stone in his sling and began to whirl it. The leather strap sang as it cut through the air, building momentum until, with a final, powerful thrust, the stone was released. It flew straight and true, a tiny missile of faith, embedding itself deep within Goliath's forehead. The giant's eyes widened in disbelief for a fleeting moment before he crashed to the earth, his fall shaking the very ground. The deafening silence that followed was shattered by a collective gasp, which quickly turned into a roar. The Philistine army, having witnessed the impossible fall of their invincible champion, was consumed by panic. They broke ranks and fled in a chaotic rout, their confidence shattered in an instant. The Israelites, their fear replaced by a sudden surge of adrenaline and triumphant joy, let out a mighty war cry and pursued their fleeing enemies, securing a decisive victory. Back in the valley, David stood over the fallen giant, no longer just a shepherd boy, but a symbol of courage and faith. The cheers of his people washed over him as they celebrated the unlikely triumph. On that day, a young shepherd, armed with little more than a sling and an unwavering belief, was hailed as the hero who had saved a nation.
The shadow of the giant had fallen, and from that shadow a new hero emerged. With the colossal head of Goliath in one hand and the giant's sword in the other, David led the triumphant army of Israel from the valley of Elah. The rout of the Philistines was absolute. Their terrifying champion slain, their ranks broken, they fled in utter panic. The Israelite soldiers, who had trembled in fear just hours before, were now roaring in victory, their voices a thunderous chorus of liberation and praise. The dread that had gripped the land for 40 days was shattered in a single decisive moment of faith and courage. As David and the returning army made their way through the towns and villages, a wave of jubilation swept across the nation. The people poured out to greet their saviors. Women with tambourines and lutes danced through the streets, their voices raised in a song of ecstatic victory. They sang and danced, and their joyful refrain echoed from every corner. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. The song reached the ears of King Saul. At first, a smile of victory graced his lips, but as the words settled in, his expression soured. Tens of thousands. The people had given the greater honor to the shepherd boy. From his chariot he watched David, who was being hailed by the adoring crowds, and the seed of a dark jealousy began to sprout in his heart. What more can he have but the kingdom? Saul muttered to himself. And from that day on, he kept a watchful, suspicious eye on David. Brought before the royal court, David presented the gruesome trophy of his victory to the king, an act of a loyal subject. Saul, masking his burgeoning resentment with a kingly facade, praised David for his bravery. In a public display of favor, he set David over his men of war, a promotion that was well received by all the people and even by Saul's own officials. David accepted his new role with the same humility and grace he had shown in the valley. He quickly won the heart of Saul's son Jonathan, who saw in David a kindred spirit, forging a friendship that would become legendary. In every task King Saul assigned him, David behaved wisely and met with success. Whether leading troops in battle or navigating the politics of the court, his reputation grew. The people of Israel and Judah came to love him, not just for his great victory, but for his character and his leadership. He was no longer just the boy who killed a giant. He was a beacon of hope and a leader of men. Yet as David's star ascended, the darkness in Saul's heart deepened. The king's fear of David grew with every victory, every song of praise, setting the stage for a tragic conflict between the anointed king and the one chosen to succeed him. The celebration had ended, but David's true trials were just beginning.